Well, it's a special session of the Granite Falls School Board. Time is now 6 o'clock. We have with us tonight Director Ledoux, Director Kincaid, Director Perry, and I'm Director Tina Beach. Normally Dr. Middleton would be with us, but he had a emergency come up this evening, and so he may be joining by Zoom later. Not sure if you'll be able to make that. So I guess I'll be making the welcome comments. I'd like to welcome all of you for coming tonight. And of course, to everyone that's usually here, welcome as well. Appreciate your time and your attendance to come and listen tonight. Just to be clear, there isn't public comment in this meeting because it's just a study session, but there is a meeting on Wednesday and you can sign up, I think, until 3 o'clock. How does that go? It's not 3 o'clock today, isn't it?
They notify me email or call or whatever by 3 p.m. the day of.
Yeah, so 3 o'clock on Wednesday, if you're interested in making public comment on Wednesday. This evening, because I don't know what Dr. Middleton was gonna say, I'm gonna kind of look across the room here and you guys help me out. Who's up first?
I'm up first.
Okay.
I'm gonna try and keep mine to maybe 10 minutes.
Okay,
It's kind of I'm glad everybody's here because at the end of my 6 slides, there's a call to action kind of thing that we could all would help the district greatly if everybody kind of voice their opinion one way or the other about a couple of bills that are in the legislature right now. And then Beth will go and have the rest of the evening. You guys can ask me questions if you want, whenever, at any point in my presentation, I could stop. There's a lot of numbers in my presentation, so I gave you guys some handouts just so you can take them with you or draw on whatever you want to do. So here. So just a quick financial overview. A lot of these things we've talked about many times, but it kind of sets the foundation for my last 2 slides or the last 3 slides. So just as a reminder, SPED is our special education enrollment has been increasing at about the same pace that the rest of our enrollment has been increasing, both in percentage and in total number of students. The trend has been kind of progressing the same way our regular enrollment has been progressing. Reminder about how SPED revenue is generated. So it flows from enrollment and it goes through apportionment. Each SPED student generates basic education funding, the same as any basic education student does. We also have federal grants that we apply for that help supplement our SPED revenue. We have safety net that we apply for. And as a reminder, safety net is kind of a like it sounds, it's a safety net for if we have some really high needs individuals in our district. We have a method of applying for some additional funding. We have to pay the first $36,000 out of our own pocket, but after that $36,000 is spent by the district, we can then ask the state to reimburse for that high needs individual. This is just a breakdown of our revenue over the last 5 years. The first column is budget. The rest is second is a forecast for this year, and the rest is actuals. A little deeper dive into how the apportionment piece of special ed is calculated. So a special ed student, there could be basically 3 types of special ed student in the eyes of funding. There is LRE1, which is the tier of special ed student that spends 80% or more of their time in special ed. And there's LRE2, which spends less than 80% of their time in the special ed environment. So the way the funding is calculated is the state for each school district calculates how much that school district spends on basic education for an individual student. For us, it's about $10,086. The LRE1 tier then says, okay, well, LRE1 should be a little more expensive than an LRE2. So they give us a multiple of 1.0075. So not even 1%, a little less than 1% increase in that funding for LRE one. So they take our LRE one enrollment times that BEA, that $10,000 times that multiplier, and that gives us a big number, $2,036,112. That's that portion of our special ed apportionment. Then it does the same thing for LRE two, same enrollment or enrollment from that category times the BEA, which is at $10,000 times 0.9995, which is the multiplier we get for the LRE two. And that generates a number. That number for us this year is at $1.818 million. So there's the same thing they do. They do the same thing for pre-K. And pre-K, it's a different multiplier, 1.15, but it's that same BEA. So it's 50.6 this year times the 10,000 times 1.15, which is $587,000. They add all those together. And in a perfect world, that's what we would be funded for from the state for special ed. But they limit the amount of enrollment you can count to the 13.5% of your total enrollment. So the state then does another calculation that says, well, your actual K-12 special ed enrollment is closer to 18%. So they have a fairly complicated formula, but what it basically does is it calculates on a ratio basis a reduction in your apportionment proportionate to how far above the cap you are. So they take that number, and for us, they just pull out $823,000 from it. So they reduce that funding, that apportionment by $823,000. So this is just a quick breakdown. It has the enrollment on top. You've seen that, that's from the other slide. It has revenue and expenditures. And what this slide is basically calling out is that I think everybody knows we're dramatically underfunded by the state for special ed. We're not unique in this, although our special ed percentage is higher than most. So we're probably, the effect on us is probably a little greater than most other districts, but everybody is underfunded for special ed significantly. Independent studies have come up with somewhere in the neighborhood of $700 million to $1 billion a year that K-12 state of Washington is underfunded in special education. The other call out is that our funding gap has actually increased through time. Even though we've gotten a lot better at claiming safety net and grants and all those things, it's still, the funding gap continues to grow. So the main thing I would like to call everybody's attention to, there's two bills going through the legislature right now, one in the House and one in the Senate. Senate Bill 5311 these have both been passed out of their houses, and they are in the opposite branch right now, getting beat up and amended, and they will have to eventually be one bill that is exactly the same. But right now they're in that kind of punching bag of the other house, the other chamber. So the Senate bill provides $359 million to school districts over 2 years. Now, remember, independent studies say that we're underfunded by $700 million to $1 billion. This tackles 18% of that gap. It increases the cap from 13.5% to 15%. Again, we're at K-12, we're at about 18%. It increases the LRE1 ratio from less than 1% all the way up to almost 12%, which is that is a nice addition. It increases LRE2 from a kind of a deduction to an actual increase of 0.06%, and it increases the pre-K from 1.15 to 1.20. And there's a slide coming up that says what this impact is on Granite with our current numbers. The House bill does $169 million over 2 years. That $700 to $1 billion of underfunding. That's, what is that? $85 million a year. Really not much. That in the first 2 years. This takes the cap up slowly, but then completely eliminates it after year 4. So no more cap after year 4. It takes LRE 1 up to 1.059 over 4 years. And it takes LRE 2 up to 1.043 over 4 years. It's heavily weighted into that last year. The first 3 years are really incremental increases, but by the last year, and I'll go over here.
Go back real quick.
Yeah,
There's a decimal point error in that
Yeah.
last.
you're probably right.
It's 1.02, right?
Yeah, 1.02
Yeah.
to 1.0430. And the pre-K has no change in its ratio at the House bill. So just currently, this is what our funding looks like this year. This is our state apportionment. We are at our actual K-12 sped percentage is 17.17. So the unfunded portion is at 3.67. The ratios generate those numbers that we did the math for on the previous slide. There's the rollback. So we're getting $3.6 million in state apportionment for special ed this year under our current law. The House bill, again, it increases, the Senate bill increases the multiplier to 15%. That helps us a lot. So the unfunded percentage is down to 2.17. It increases the multipliers. And as a result, it generates a lot more special ed funding. And because the cap has been raised, the rollback is a lot less. The rollback on the previous slide was $823,000. Rollback on this is only $531,000. So the net difference is that the Senate bill, if it were implemented this year with our enrollment the way it is this year, with our everything else the way it is this year, it'd be an increase of $665,000. That $655,000 is going to be the same for the life of this bill. There's no more stepping up there. So we'll still be, we were underfunded. I see us as underfunded by $1.6 million this year. Now we're just underfunded by $1 million. The House bill, on the other hand, in its first year, it only changes the cap by 0.5%, and it changes the multipliers by a very small rate. So it decreases the rollback by, like, going off memory, $80,000. The net result is that we gain $195,000 from the House bill in year 1. But by the time year 4 comes around, we're gaining $1 million. So
Can I ask a question about your numbers?
yeah,
Explain, so our current sped population K through 12 is 17.17%. But our total sped enrollment is 19.4.
that includes the
That's for
preschool.
schools
Yeah,
pre-K.
yeah,
So in your calculations, you're taking the 1717 as our sped enrollment percentage,
that's the way the state handles it.
which doesn't include pre-K, but then you're
Right.
adding pre-K in into the multiplier below.
There's no cap on pre-K. So when pre-K increases, if the sped population of pre-K increases, the funding increases linearly.
Right.
There's no cap. So that is definitely, and these bills definitely change the multiplier for pre-K. So deciding which bill that we want to support impacts the amount of money we generate for pre-K.
I think you're missing my point. So my point, I'm just trying to understand.
Yeah.
So the multiplier, our actual sped percentage, including pre-K, is 19%. You aren't using that to calculate the unfunded portion of it, but you are calculating pre-K and how much money we get. So isn't that divide greater than the 3.17? Isn't it technically 19, the 19 whatever? Because you are including pre-K in your calculations.
Yes, but that 3.17% is how they calculate the rollback.
Okay, because they're not rolling back on
Pre-K,
on pre-K.
right?
Okay. But pre-K is, the cap is changing on that in
The cap's not changing, but the multiplier is.
the multiplier, I mean.
Yeah,
It's changing.
for the Senate bill, but not for the House bill.
Okay. All right, keep going.
Okay. So just some kind of high level takeaways. Year 1 Senate is significantly better than the House bill in year 1. the Senate bill is better all the way through until the last year. In 26-27, the House bill is $350,000 better than the Senate bill. But then this is kind of WASA, WASBO, WASDA's stamped on this. A lot can happen between now and 26-27. And just because the Senate bill passes doesn't mean that next year they can't pass a better one. And just because the House bill passes doesn't mean that by the time we get out to 26-27, they can't say, well, we miscalculated, we want to introduce another bill. So WASA, WASBO, they're all advocating very strongly that we only advocate for the Senate bill, and that if we want to say something, we want to say heck no to the House bill, because it is pushing the money too far out. And in 4 years, there could be a lot of uncertainty, and these organizations will keep fighting for more fixes to special ed. So get as much money up front as we can, because we know what that is. So I'm just here to say that if everybody here could advocate for Senate Bill 5311, and maybe that means the board wants to do a resolution and send the resolution off to the state, we could have that ready for this board meeting. Probably means, contacting local representatives, the House, all the people we've contacted before and everything else. But they're pretty blatantly different bills, and really getting the Senate bill passed would be a tremendous help for this district.
Can you go back to the Senate bill slide one more time? All right, so you have, tell me again what year 4, do you have a slide on there?
Year 4 of the Senate bill is just that number still. The House bill, year 4,
They're the ones that changed that.
year 4 goes to, the difference is $1 million. But it's 195, and then it's like, actually, it was a lot to put on a slide, but it's, let's see here. It's 326 in the second year, 452 in the third year, and then $1,016,000 in the fourth year.
Right, but there's a lot of uncertainty between now and 4 years from now.
Right, and if you multiply 4 times 665 versus 4 times 665 is 2.7 million maybe.
Mhm.
And even out to year 5, if you add up all the House bills, it's only 1.9 million. So, and a ton of uncertainty.
Right.
What's the timeline on all this? So the Senate bill, they just come to actually for money to hit the bank.
This would be next school year. Day 1 of next school year. They've got to reconcile the 2 bills in both chambers. And so while they're in the opposite chamber, they're going to get amendments added. It's going to be a mess. And then it probably won't be fully reconciled until actual budget talk time. Both sides have to release their budgets.
Mhm.
Then they'll see how much money is allocated and available, and then they'll hash it out, and then they'll go back to the other houses. They have to eventually have one bill that is passed by both chambers.
Is it possible that, right, so if they're throughout the collaboration process, that we see it right now as a jump from 13.5 to 15, which is great because we're getting year 3 money in year 1, the House bill respectively. Is it possible that we're backing it and eventually whatever the conclusion they come to total is still some sort of a stepping stone like the House bill?
Yes, very possible. The number that WASA has been throwing out is that they think that the budget stomach has about a 2-year, $400 million ballpark of what they were willing to spend on special ed.
Yeah.
So that's in the ballpark of what the Senate bill is, but the House is going to have their things that they need to have attached to it to make it through the House. The Senate's going to have the things they need to have attached to it. hopefully it stays, once it's all said and done, it's in that $400 million over 2 years range, and it calculates through like this does, that, we're getting $600,000 in the first year.
So just to add a couple of things, as you guys know, I'm on the WASDA Legislative Committee, which is in charge of kind of testifying on bills and prioritizing WASDA's priority list and stuff like that. And we testified on this bill a couple of times. So the really disappointing thing is the House bill started off completely removing the cap. And it felt like there was some appetite for that initially. Unfortunately, that appetite went away as we got deeper into this current session. So the 15% already is kind of like a grumble, because obviously removing the cap would be huge for us. But I think I heard that it would be $700 million impact in the state, and they just don't have the money for it. The governor came out early saying he's prioritizing low-income housing and all of that stuff. So that seems to be where the lion's share of the budget's going to go. The budget will be released later on this week, where we'll get a better idea of kind of how they're allocating money. But there's certainly a couple of pitfalls that happen to this. They could not come to a consensus on these two bills. They could just die. It just goes away. We get nothing. It stays exactly the way it is now. Nothing changes, and they try again next session. Or they need to weigh at the cap, or a number of things. So there is no guarantee to any of this. This is just something that made it across the initial starting block before the cutoff. But if they haven't come to a consensus and have a combined bill by another cutoff, which comes in 2 or 3 weeks, it dies again. And it just goes away, and they move on to something else. Marshall's point about advocating for it, there's certainly a very finite window where if this is going to have some life at all, that we need to do the best. And the people that you would reach out to have the most impact are members of the House Educational Committee, which our Representative Carolyn Eslick sits on, as well as members of the Senate Early Learning Committee would be the best two people to talk to, on top of members of the Appropriations Committee, because those are the ones that allocate funds, and there is obviously an allocation of additional funds here. So just to give you everyone who's listening some idea of good people to reach out to. Just wanted to add that part, Marshall.
Oh, you done?
That's it for me.
All right.
I have a question really quick.
Yeah.
I know we've talked about this before, but just for my own sake. So we're at 17.17. What's the average around us?
It's kind of all over the place. If you took an average, it'd probably be close to 15,
Okay.
maybe 14.5.
But statewide is 13. and
Yeah.
some change.
That's okay. That's what they're going to go around.
That's what.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think the 15% number kind of captures a lot of the problems for the bigger districts. And that's where the political probably might is.
All right, building support request. You recall after my presentation in October, Dr. Leach asked me what my plan was. And last school board session, we looked at the project charter that I put together that listed several activities and goals. And one of them was to do focus groups with our staff, many of whom are in the room right now, where we looked at our data and I said, hey, what do you think about this? Tell me about that. That is informing the rest of the plan. We're finally scheduled to do the middle school on Wednesday. And then in addition to that, we've done some training around building independence for our students, because that's our end goal, is to have independent adults after they leave us. And then there was putting together a building support request process, which we looked at last time. We talked about last time, shared with the school board directors. And then last Thursday, I presented this to the principals and assistant principals and actually literally like walked through this document with them. And so this was the presentation that I went over with them as I walked through it. So where we looked at, sometimes we know that the need exceeds the resources that are allocated, that really we needed some sort of communication tool to clarify what the process is. There's definitely some confusion about what that means in terms of having clear communication so that we were not completely surprised by, oh, guess what? This IEP meeting met and made this decision. So really, what does that request process look like? And data really being the foundation of those requests. So including me prior to the request, and it's just me. It's not like there's a whole office. It's just me and my administrative assistant. And so this process outlines what that looks like. There are a couple of different flow charts in the process. If you recall, this was shared with you. Last study session, we shared this electronically with you.
Oh, I can go make some copies real quick if you want.
Yes,
Yeah, I'll make some copies.
Okay, I
Can I copy everything here?
I intentionally didn't bring my.
Can I copy everything? Okay, I'll be right back.
And so this would be a process that we would look at whether we're looking at change of placement or whether we're looking at additional adult support. They would be reviewed on Mondays and that I would be then scheduling the meetings. So here's the process for a program placement change. The building team themselves would come together. They would include me in that process. We would talk about intervention planning, brainstorm different options. The team would really analyze, okay, so we've tweaked things a little bit. Maybe we've changed schedules. Maybe we've changed teacher. Maybe we've added additional minutes to the students' day in terms of the services. And then we're thinking, yeah, this is probably what we want to do. So let's initiate a reevaluation. And so the school psychologist and other people that are involved in that do a reevaluation. Then we hold the meeting, and then at that point, if both of those things look like, yeah, it makes sense, then we go ahead and move forward to scheduling the IEP meeting to actually make that decision.
So can I just ask a question about that? So when you say we have a meeting, is the parent, like at what point in steps 1 through 5 do the parents become?
You know, the parents could be involved all the way from number 1, but typically they would probably start being involved sort of at number 3-ish. 3 to
Do
4.
we reach out to parents at number 3, or is that just a
You know,
parent?
sometimes the parent is the one making the request. Sometimes it's sort of an internal building thing, and then, you know, parents are being made a part of that conversation.
Okay, and is it different for the, like previously, the last time, there were maybe 3 different kind of types of, you kind of had big buckets of types of IEPs. Some of them are IEPs that are like medically fragile, where we have IEPs, but there's nothing that the district is going to do to cure the medical issue, right? We're just going to support the student versus like, I think there were, I can't remember. Shoot, I should-
That'll be on the next, I mean, not that level of detail, but we can address that when we're talking about the additional adult support. Right now, this is when
Okay.
we're looking at.
So I just like, okay, so we
Yeah.
have parents in
So,
there
yeah.
somewhere between 3 and 5.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
So-
just to be clear, this plan is happening, starts today or starts next school year?
This is still a draft. I haven't done all of the focus groups yet, but I did present the draft to the principals last week.
So the hope is to start in next school year, beginning of next school year, or I guess whenever you get to.
Last week. No, what I'm thinking is that once we get the focus groups done, then we need to train the staff on it. And so really walking them through what that looks like. And since some of the case managers are here, I think some of them know this has been coming. I've sort of hinted that this is coming, or had direct conversations with some of them that this was coming. And so they're really kind of the primary ones that are doing that, but they're also working with their team in their building.
So I'm promise I'm not trying to belabor the point. So then best case scenario, beginning of next school year, or is that what you're
I
thinking?
think maybe sooner than that. We can get people trained on the process.
Okay,
Because really, I wouldn't expect people to follow a process if they haven't been trained on it.
so worst case scenario, beginning of
Yeah.
next.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And so, the request for additional staffing is very similar, and I think, Director Beach, that's what you're referring to. One of the, so these are a list of considerations. The request should describe who's gonna provide the direction, because we've got some of our paraeducators here in the room. They are supposed to be provided direction by a person, and so that needs to be clear, like who's the person that's providing the direction. And that flow chart that Marshall's making a copy of has those considerations in it. And then as part of this, we're going to start asking that an independence plan is created when these requests are made, so that we're right from the get-go thinking, okay, how are we going to get the student to independence? And Director Beach, I think that's what you were referring to, is that there are some students, you know, maybe it's a medical issue, they're always going to have this level of support probably until they're 21 and they age out with us. But to enhance the social development, independence, and self-determination of these students, those who can become more independent, we're going to create that independence plan with.
So helping, oh,
I was gonna, so is, what part of this is new? Like, are you doing A, B, C, and D now? I'm guessing, obviously now. So I guess, could you just quickly talk about the parts of that are, they're going to be new additions?
This right here is all new. We
It's
don't,
all new.
yeah.
Okay.
yeah.
can you tell me what it looks like it's maybe the flow chart for considerations regarding?
The requests.
Remember.
I looked, I didn't see the flow chart
Yeah,
or
I
anything,
think
but
we didn't get what you think we got. at the
Oh.
last time. We got just the project charter.
yeah, at least it's not on the slides, but I didn't take.
The attachments I got with the Word document that had
Yeah.
a charter. But it didn't look nearly as thick as what you were putting in your hand.
Okay, there were two documents you were supposed to get last time.
Well, I just got the charter, so maybe that's why we're sitting here going,
Yeah, and what you got electronically had links to the flow charts.
Oh, yeah, process.
Okay, we'll make sure that you get that. Melanie, you might have to dig. Or I could resend after
What meeting was? Do you remember?
the last study session.
oh.
Project chart?
No, the building. It might have been called staffing.
It's in like a footer of the Word doc.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, it's down there, it says C flow chart, and flow chart is as a hyperlink.
I must have missed it, I didn't see it, so I will go back and find it.
So this process is very similar to the other one in that it starts with the building committee meeting, intervention planning, analysis. That the team looks at the interventions, what are we tweaking to see what else we can do. Then there's the building support request process, and then, yeah, it looks like we really have exhausted everything, and this is supported, let's go ahead and schedule an IEP meeting. And then there would be expectation that we have ongoing data collection and monitoring to track the use of that. And that's part of that independence plan. And then said, no, at this point, not ready to support, but here are some recommendations for some additional interventions that you can be working on. There is some case management involved in this. The independence plans that we're now suggesting would be a part of that process, would outline that plan for increasing independence, that we would then update that every year at IEP meeting time, that everyone has a copy of that plan, including the general education teacher, the parents themselves. And then another document that apparently you didn't get electronically, but now you have is an FAQ for the independence plans. And AP rating, these students who we're adding on become some of that safety net money that, as it's an increased cost to the district, that we can request reimbursement for, and is part of that almost $1 million that we're requesting this year. So we ask that staff work with the director on that, because there's some compliance pieces and some very specific things that need to be in place. And if they're not in place, we don't get the full reimbursement for that.
So we could be putting out some sort of special document to everyone to say, these are the things for sure that you need to have, or talk to me about.
Yeah, it's usually a little more casual, it's usually a little more casual about it, but it's usually like, please make sure that that is signed by the parent or whatever, yeah.
Yeah, I just worry that the idea that you're gonna single-handedly door knock every IEP owner in the district to ensure that seems like a heavy lift on one person. So maybe,
Yeah, we're getting better at it.
so maybe putting that out, so generalized expectations or something, so that
Yeah.
everyone's aware.
Yeah,
Plus, nobody wants to be door knocked 200 times each, so,
well, some of our case managers are hit heavier than others. And then transportation is a piece of that. If the one-on-one is necessary for the bus, we would ask that the case manager would provide support to the driver in terms of what is needed. It needs to be calculated in the IEP service matrix. Most of our case managers have gotten pretty good at that. And then we're also doing a transportation tab in the IEP now, to help with communication.
so what does support to the driver mean?
So the student's gonna need a harness, and here are some things that will help you know about the student. Here's the student's behavior intervention plan, etc.
So we're not asking. I just want to be sure that we're super clear what we're expecting somebody to, we're delegating the training of something to somebody, to the driver. So is it like, we tell them, this is the IEP related, this is the expectation related to this goal, like we hand the driver the IEP goal, so they're aware of what.
I mean, I think that there are some cases where the driver can support a student on a social or behavioral goal, probably, but in most cases.
Forgive my ignorance, honestly, I don't know what an IEP looks like for a school bus. So what are we expecting a school bus driver to do in support of an IEP?
So if a student requires special transportation and in this case, we're really talking about if the one-on-one is needed for the bus. Like how is the one-on-one supposed to be used? Is it a medical reason or is it for behavior? Yeah. And then the other thing that I was asked to do was to talk about the referral process. My plan was today actually to talk to the principals about the referral process, because we didn't have time on Thursday. And then we had a situation that we had to deal with this morning. So this will be in an upcoming training with the principals around the referral process. And this is really in terms of special education referral process.
And these can come from parents or staff.
That's the very first bullet.
Oh, look at that.
Yeah, it's gonna be heard by parent, staff, or others. They could be someone outside of the school or a grandparent, or anyone can actually refer a student. So the expectation for the principals is that the staff in the building understands the referral process. They are required to be in writing. We have an optional referral form, and if the person can't write, we would assist them in terms of communicating that information verbally and filling the form out for them. Once we receive a referral, we have a 25 school day timeline to decide whether we're not going to evaluate or whether we're going to evaluate or not. All certificated employees should document referrals when they receive them. If you're not, just notify a certificated staff member that you got a referral. And then the building special education department, which most of which is like some folks that are on the team at the building, often it's the school psychologist, records the referral, provides prior written notice of the referral, and then if it's not the school psychologist, they advise the psychologist to start reviewing the data to determine if an evaluation is warranted. And at this point, I'll wait till the next slide. So this data that they're reviewing is a lot of different information from a lot of different sources. So some examples could be the child's history, talking to the parent about, did the student meet the developmental milestones, looking at report cards and progress reports, teachers' information, maybe some outside providers' information, looking at assessment data, maybe there's some medical information, anything really that may be relevant to assist in this determination. And a really big one is what interventions have been attempted. Okay, so this is going back to our MTSS work. What's the tier 1? What's the tier 2? You know, what have we done so far and how has the student responded to intervention? And if there hasn't been intervention, then that's one of those things we'd be like, so I guess we're probably not going to evaluate until you've attempted those interventions. Also, there's some other things that we look at, like if the student's attendance has been really poor, they haven't been able to access their education. And so really, we need to know how they can do once they've had the opportunity. So if that review of the data occurs at a meeting, the parents are invited to that meeting. And then the psychologist provides written notice of the decision, whether we're going to evaluate or not. And then it's forwarded to the student services department really through our IUP online system. If the team does not suspect disability, they may deny the request to evaluate, and that notice, including the reason for the denial, is given in a prior written notice. I know the word deny sounds really strong, but
I got a few of them.
if the determination is a child should be evaluated, then we decide on what the recommended areas will be. We have multiple areas that we can assess in, and that will assist in providing the parents with notice of, what they suspect is part of disability, what they're concerned about, and also develop who the group members will be. Is a speech language pathologist going to be included in the group? Who all needs to be a part of that? The psychologist is responsible for the written notice, and consent for evaluation is sent with that notice. They will seek consent without delay. A couple of things here, just for your awareness. We don't require consent from a biological parent if the student is a ward of the state, if they can't be located or their rights are terminated, or if there's been someone appointed to represent the student. And then when consent is given, and that's when we actually receive the consent. So you could have it at home signed, but if you didn't send it to us, we haven't received it yet. Once the consent is given, the district then selects the evaluation group who's going to be a part of this assessment. And then it is completed within 35 school days after consent. This is one of those compliance pieces that I think I mentioned. We didn't quite meet our initial evaluation timelines 100%, which is always the goal. And we always are judged on that if we're at 100, if we're not at 100%. The only one that really helps us with the compliance is if the parent and district agree in writing to extend the timeline. It really looks like we're just not going to get this done. It's really hard to schedule. You were out with COVID for a month or whatever. That
35 school days is like 2 calendar months, almost, right?
yeah.
So we're missing scheduling a meeting as 2 calendar months.
Well, when you're doing 60 a year, sometimes, yeah. But we want to be at 100%, but we are able to sometimes extend the timeline. We're still dinged for compliance for numbers 2 and 3, but those are allowable excuses, and those are the ones that we document when we do the report to the state that the parents didn't make the student available and send them to school, or maybe it was a private school student or a homeschooled student. Or the student enrolls in another school district while we're in the middle of the evaluation. If for some reason that the school team is feeling really strongly about this, and the parents will not give consent, we ask that the teams contact me. And then I would make the determination to either use, if we wanted to pursue it, we might choose to use mediation or due process. It doesn't apply if the student is homeschooled or a private school. But if we decided not to pursue those options and we couldn't get consent, we send a notice to say, you know, we attempted to do this, our team went through this process, you're not giving consent. We're not responsible for the fact that you're not giving consent for us to determine whether the student needs special education services. Never. Well, I mean, rarely.
Questions?
I just have an overall, so yes, this is. I think at a super high level, and as I think about it more, this was what, at least I was. I think envisioning in terms of, right, there's step by steps, right? There's a referral, there's, you know, the very black and white process of how to go through it. But I'm not obviously here to police any effort or anything. It's with all these steps, all these processes that go in. I think it's just very important to make sure that we have very clear expectations for everyone. So those days, whatever it was, 25 days to understand if we're going to evaluate, and then 35 days following, that we are not only adhering to those as best we can. I understand that there's sometimes where it can slip through, but making sure that that is just very clear and prominent so that the families know a timeline that, okay, at least by this time I will have an answer for this, and at least by this timeline I'll have an answer for this. And to go on to the other part of where maybe things might push or whatever, I'm always a big advocate for, I'll call it more than required communications, right? So just extremely transparent, just because I do have a fear that, right, we're adding, which I love seeing the process that goes into it. I just have a fear that some people might get, you know, pushed off or left out of the loop accidentally. But we want to make sure that that doesn't happen, right? So that everybody is heard, seen, felt. And if it does get pushed by a week, they're let known as soon as we know that it's going to get pushed, right? It's not, oh, I'll get to them eventually. And then finally the deadline comes and I go, oops, actually, I have to push it back. That I'm sure we've all been part of those where you think you're going to get something on a day and then it gets pushed back. So that would just be my challenge on this, is everything's looking great, at least from my eyes, you know, relying on you as the experts. Just making sure that we're staying on top of it, the biggest thing. So not really a question, just an observation.
Is it my turn?
I'm still thinking.
Okay.
Very.
Yeah, couple of questions. So, I appreciate you having a very detailed plan and flow chart. I guess I just want to float out. Is there any, one of the things I talked with Dr. Middleton with one of my meetings is I know, and certainly in my line of work, there's outside entities, consultants can come in outside and kind of evaluate systems, programs, stuff like that. Give you a holistic review of best practice, kind of where you're at, suggested modifications, those types of things. Do you feel like this chart is addressing kind of the major outliers, concerns with the program? Or do you think there's any value in bringing in someone to have kind of that second eye, non-associated party look?
I think this process will help with communication and clarification of a process, but there's really not a process currently. And I think we should have someone come in and take a look at us. I think, I'm not sure if you all recall that last year, my first year in Granite Falls, we had a fiscal review from OSPI, and it really ended up being exactly like the state audit that we get every year. It was really just looking at fiscal. We kind of were hoping that they were going to be able to like say, hey, what do you think? Why do we spend, so much money on special education in Granite Falls? Can you take a look at this and give us some guidance? And so I would say both.
Do you think that would delay the implementation of this or, okay, so is that, and I don't know how that, obviously, we aren't making any motions or anything tonight, but I don't know how that, if there's board action that's needed to, I mean, obviously the board's gonna have to approve the cost, but I guess this is a better question for Dr. M, but when can that come in front of us? That like, hey, we found someone, here's what it's going to cost, here's what they're going to look at. Would be my question for Dr. M if he was here. I'm just looking at board chair so that if she technically is the one that communicates with Dr. M.
Yes, I have 3 on my list, so I'm gonna go ahead and add that.
Yeah, because I certainly, it sounds like worst case scenario is to have at least this running by, next year. So I certainly don't want to elongate it, but if there's other recommended changes, we're like, oh gosh, that is a great point. I would hate to train staff and then have to train staff again, right? Because, oh, this other thing is changing. So it seems to be more, less time consuming to kind of bite the apple once. And then I just wanted to go back and have a conversation. One of the things about having a detailed process is everybody knows kind of where they fit, kind of the process, but I've found in the real world, it kind of stretches out the time for things because, there's check boxes, there's things that people have to do. Is there any part of this that, being that we're already missing some 35-day windows, is there any part of this that makes you more concerned that number is going to increase of us? No. Can you just give me some feedback on why you think that, or?
So the building support request process is really when we're just looking for a change of placement, which involves a reevaluation. The referral process is what's already in our district procedure. And it's just a clarification of what that looks like. So, the one thing is that we are looking at our MTSS processes to make sure that we've got those interventions in place. That's really the pre-referral process. Referral is when we decide, yep, we got, someone has actually requested that we do an evaluation and this is our timeline. And I think I mentioned recently that right now we're on track to be on time for all of our initial evaluations this year.
Okay, so it's not a, hey, we don't have enough staffing or anything like that, and and then on top of not having enough staffing, we've got this new detailed process, which is moving inversely the timeframes. We feel like we've got it.
Well, I would tell Marshall, I would love to have preschool psychologists.
Right. Well, I mean, I want to have those kind of conversations because I certainly want anything that we agree with here. I don't want the expectations to be built on bad information, right? Meaning we've got this great thing, but now we've created this new problem that makes things even worse. That seems to be a waste of effort. So I guess if that's the discussion that we need to have it. I mean, you guys let me know if that's the discussion in order to meet those 100% of the time, because obviously that is a significant requirement of a district, and we should be hitting that out of 10 times. So I guess I'll just leave that floating out there, and you can guys let me know if we need to circle back on that. The only other thing that I have was, and one of the things I've heard kind of conjecturally is that, well, not conjecturally, I think you specifically said last time that a lot of the pairs that we have with behavioral or need because there's behavior interventions that are needed. Or am I remembering that correct?
I'm looking around the room at the paras that are here, and I see some that are for students that have some medical issues, some that are that third bucket where really might not necessarily be medical or behavior. We've got some kids who they're not behavior, they really need a lot of support. I'm looking at one in particular. But yeah, I would say we have a.
I found the slide. Yeah, you said we had 18 pairs total. We've got 32 total one-to-ones, 18 are due to behavior. 17 health, 5 transportation, 2 developmental. So it sounds like behavior, I mean, at least on those numbers, is the more significant need.
And sometimes it's safety. Sometimes there are other needs besides behavior, but probably the reason that, the person is assigned is mostly because of the behavior.
So I guess that leads me to my question. I didn't see anywhere in here since. I'm a little confused by what you're saying now on whether it is behavior or safety or this information maybe has changed or something along those lines, but I didn't see any great conversation related to what seems to be our significant issue of the behavior piece. So like, you know, hey, let's do this, let's do a behavior intervention plan, let's let that run for blank amount of time, then we reevaluate or stuff like that. Maybe I missed it. I'm seeing this for the first time today. And I was trying to listen and read at the same time. Is that a missing piece or am I wrong? Feel free to tell me I'm wrong.
So the intervention planning, which would be where we would do some problem solving, brainstorming, implement interventions and support for the students, collecting data. Yeah, part of that is we need to do a functional behavioral assessment and develop a behavior intervention plan.
I guess I may be wrong, I guess. Because the intervention planning, I guess the sentence that got me is, critical components, review of authentic implementation of interventions and support for all the students in a restrictive environment. So I read that and I read that as, hey, we've already tried these things and these things didn't work. And here's the data or the information that we have. So I guess it felt like reading it, like there should be building team meeting. And of course, you're way smarter about this than me. Second is behavior intervention plan or intervention or some specific thing behavior wise, if necessary. And then intervention planning is reviewing, okay, that's number 3. Did number 2 work specifically or not? And you kind of say that in intervention planning. I'm not arguing that fact, but I guess we're not specifically calling out for what appears to be the biggest driver for us to have paras. And tell me if you don't understand what I'm saying. I guess.
Yeah, I think this is the general process for all of those requests as opposed to, you know, the more specific ones. So
Okay.
as this student has significant communication needs, is it because we need to provide some support during transitions?
So you're okay with sorry, I interrupted you, Director Lou. So you're okay with maybe having to do number 2 twice. I guess what I mean by that is intervention planning comes to you, hey, well, what about we've got behavior students, well, you know, have you done a bit? No, we haven't. Okay, let's do one, right? And then, okay, let's do the bit. And then you come back, okay, did that work? And so you might end up doing number 2 twice. Okay. Sorry, Director Lou.
No, I was just gonna ask for clarity from what you're asking. Are you asking about identification or like, because when I hear the behavioral side too, I feel like that falls under the independence plans that are being developed.
So the independence plan is then the transition of transitioning the kid back to away from having a one-on-one or needing that specific support to being independent again. What I'm talking about is the things that we do prior to discussing. It's really part of that that sentence, a critical components review of authentic implementation and interventions and support for the student in a less restrictive environment. So that's a bit of behavior intervention plan. Okay, hey, we have a kid who has really big behaviors related on, you know, I don't know, related on that situation. Okay, well, let's remove that situation or let's try to modify that situation in the classroom so that kid no longer is aggressed or ignited in that way. And we see this really big behavior. So she answered my question. Essentially, in the real world, you might have to do number 2 twice, right?
Right.
They'll sit down, they'll talk, they'll be like, oh, we haven't done that. We haven't really addressed that. Okay, go do that. And then you gotta come back, okay, how did that work?
Yeah.
Did we
Yeah,
still-
to that point, what steps have you taken? Right, to identify as
Right.
well, and then effectively once an IEP comes in plan, then the independence plan goes into.
And just for an ease of flow, I was saying, well, maybe there's a number between 1 and 2, where we specifically say that.
Mhm.
Okay, have you done that? Okay, then, do that first and then come talk to me. But it sounds like, it'll all work out in the broth, so to speak, at the end of it. That's all I had, Director Reed.
Director Kincaid, you want me to go first? Or-
Yeah,
Okay. I have just a few questions. Just kidding. I double space and I write kind of big. So I brought the notebook instead of the laptop because I wanted to be sure I was really like dialed in, but now I wish I had brought a laptop so I could look at that slide again. So we talked about that actually. We talked about the driver support. The referral being required to be in writing, do we communicate out to everyone, including the parents and the staff, what constitutes the request? Like what has to be in it for it to be received to go, okay, this is a request? Like, are there specific parts other than a date? Like, it says I want my,
I mean, we have an optional referral form, but you could say, I am hereby requesting my student be evaluated for special education. I'm referring this particular student for a special evaluation.
so that there's no requirements for it to be a thing. Okay,
And the date starts as the day you get that email or.
it's not the date
communication.
on the letter, it's, so I'm assuming when we receive the mail, we stamp it somehow, so we know. So then, that's, for this step 2, the intervention planning, I think it's important that we somehow communicate out the expectation, I guess. So I remember seeing like, and I'm gonna get the numbers in the wrong order right now, like 25 days, 35 school days, 35 school days. And then you could circle around a few times or whatever. I think it's important that we put that timeline out there at the beginning somehow, because I'll tell you as a parent who has a kid on an IEP, right? It did not occur to me that it would take from September to February to get my kid to have any services. And then the services that he would get would be 20 minutes once a week or 20 minutes twice a week. You know what I mean? So I guess I thought, I didn't realize how many calendar days 25 school days is when you take out February, sorry, like October. I don't know.
Thanksgiving.
Yeah, just take all those days out and suddenly we're the end of February, right? So I think we don't write the law that says 25 days. We don't write the law that says 35 days. It sounds like for whatever reason, 25 and 35 is still putting us in the time crunch. I mean, it's still, and I will tell you, as much as I'm sharing my whole story right now, that end of February, I got a call less than a week ahead of time that said, this is due next Thursday by law. And I was like, well, I'm having surgery that day. I can do any time between now and that day. I then get an email that says, our staff can only meet that day. We'll just say that you don't want to participate. And I'm like, but I do. And they said, well, can your husband just come? He's my driver, but cool. Anyway, so I think that my whole point of this is I've been the frustrated parent on the receiving end of this. And it's not, I think we need to set those expectations at the top, right? The very beginning, like when that referral comes in, this is a timeline or some sort of, I'd like to see that in the process, some sort of communication that sets the expectations that this is, when we say 25 days, we don't mean the end of this month. We mean it might be February before we get this done, but at least you don't have that frustration building of not understanding, or you get to the end of 25 days and then suddenly you go, oh, now we gotta go another 35 more. Like you did not see that coming. So anyway, for somebody who doesn't live in the special education / legal world, right? I think it's just important to set those expectations because I'm guessing people on the front lines hear about it from people like me who don't even understand what is taking so long, right? So just setting the expectation of this is a process, and these are all the things we're gonna do before we get there. I think it's really important, and I think we go a long ways for our transparency and communication with parents and kind of what they think we're doing. You know, how they see the efforts, that they can see the effort and all the little things that have to happen behind the scenes before it gets to them. So anyway, I hope that somehow we get a piece in there for that. So let's see. You mentioned that there are many different assessment areas. Do we have sort of a new list of what can we put that in that communication of these are kind of the areas, or how do we do that?
So that consent form actually has little check boxes of different areas that will be assessed.
So I wish I could see that, but yeah, the communication. Oh, when we talk about, because you don't think I come around to this, the data-driven discussion. So what kind of data are you expecting to see when you get a referral from a principal or a teacher, somebody that says, look, this kid needs a one-on-one, and you expect to see data about what's been tried? What type of data are you expecting to see?
Well, I think it would depend on what is the biggest concern. Let's say a student is eloping, so they're running, they're leaving the school, the classroom, the location. And it's like, this is just horrible, this kid is eloping all the time, okay. So let's come up with some plans on how to address it, and can we start taking some data on how much this is happening? And maybe it is really happening a lot, but maybe after we actually start taking the data, maybe we see, oh, it's really only like once a week, or, you know, or something. So it's really case by case dependent on what that is, but it would need to be something that is actually measured. And so whether that's a tally mark, or it's something that we're counting, or somehow crunching the information so that we have a sense of what's happening.
So could I just ask a follow-up to that question, just because I know you know this as well, Dr. Mills. You know, one of the things that was very clear is, I don't so much hear it now, but certainly years ago was that, you know, there was these, actually, no, Director Kincaid has said this multiple times, that there's some classrooms that have these students that have these really big behaviors that are causing evacuations of the classroom, these huge disruptions and stuff like that. I guess in all of this discussion, I guess I don't want to get lost in the sauce or in the discussion that, you know, while we are looking at data and doing all of those things, we're actively engaging those students or that student, I shouldn't pluralize it, trying to address those behaviors so as not to impact the other learning environment and stuff like that. Like we're chewing our gum and walking at the same time. We're looking at data, trying to throw things at it, but also actively engaging into that situation and trying to curb, derail, stop those behaviors as much as we can, all at the same time, right? Okay. I just don't want us to, while we're trying to figure it out and look at data and stuff like that, I guess I just want, you know, to assure that we're all hands on deck trying to address that situation too, so.
And data too doesn't have to be a count of how many times something has happened or whatever. Data can be a write-up, and there have been 6 write-ups. And we have, you can even say evidence, right? We have evidence that this child should be referred, you know, for such and such. Because I also don't want people to get caught up in the concept of like, oh my, we're not suggesting that a kid has to do a certain action X number of times, or, you know, it's like there's a tally somewhere. It's like, have there been enough write-ups, so to speak, has a teacher written enough times that there's been this, you know, classroom evacuating sort of activity, or has there been, you know, something that then brings it to the attention so that Beth and team can look at it and say, wow, yeah, there's 6 write-ups for this one student. Like, I don't know what the number is, where you eventually say, okay, we need to take action on this, right? And so data comes in all different forms. comes in financial forms, but also, yeah, just the evidence that, you know, it's been witnessed and documented, so to speak.
That's exactly why I'm asking the question. I just don't want a situation where someone comes, well, you know, we have this student in our classroom and he flipped the table 5 times. Well, on the 6th time.
Right, exactly.
Right, where we've set some arbitrary number, right, for the data or there's something along those lines. So I feel like she's addressed that. I appreciate you doing it.
One of the things I'll say about that, something that may help, for instance, I was in a classroom and student was out of control. The teachers didn't have the required training to stop him from doing what he was doing. So the entire class had to be evacuated. We had to wait for the principal to come down because she's the only one who had that.
Train.
Right, she's the only one who had that training. Is it feasible? I don't know what it takes monetarily, but can we get our teachers all trained in them? Because that would reduce class evacuations, it would stop behaviors, you know, as they're happening, that sort of thing. So that's something that,
How often are class evacuations happening?
well, years ago, my daughter's class was almost daily for a while.
Okay.
So it just depends on who you have in your class and what's going on. But, what was the other thing I was gonna say? Oh, off of Tina's thing, she was talking about the timelines and stuff for kids being evaluated. I don't know, I don't remember what we're at now as far as people who are on contract. But I know last year we had someone who was on contract, like a psychologist or something. We were waiting, I heard from several parents, they were waiting for their children to be evaluated. And that individual was missing for weeks and nobody could find them. And so these evaluations weren't happening. And I think that child, it took months and months and months, maybe even close to a year before they were able to be evaluated. So I don't know I don't know how we can hold contracted employees more accountable, like, you know, through the services, I guess.
Do we have
Psychologists or
anything in
counselors.
the contracts about like non-response versus like our ability to terminate the contract or like expectations? Is there anything in those contracts about that? Can we check on that? But yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I didn't expect you to have a contract in your back pocket. But I think it's a fair point to check on that. I just had, so part of this conversation initially came up for our budget, we're like projected 1.2 million over special education. Is that right? Am I remembering?
I think we're at about 1.6 now.
1.6 million over budget, which is.
Well, not over budget.
Not over budget.
Over what we're funded for. Over budget for, I think, 500,000.
But we're still 1.6 away from what we funded for. And we talked about contracted services versus hiring in-house. Of course, the numbers that you showed, Marshall, contracted services, the actuals are quite a bit higher than we intended.
About 700,000.
Yeah. So, now I'm gonna go into. What are we doing? What can we do? Is our only plan to just write another contract for more? Or like, what can we do to hire? Because that really is a cost saving measure for us.
It's advertising. It's advertising wherever like an SLP might look for a job, where a school psychologist might look for
Are
a
we
job.
doing it?
Mhm.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Just.
But I mean, it's competitive out there for those services. We're not adding them to the workforce very quickly.
I mentioned to Dr. Middleton, even putting our employment opportunity links like higher on the webpage, because you gotta scroll for it. So if you're, I mean, even if you're there for something else, if you see there's open jobs, you might click there just because you're curious. I don't know, people like me go down a hole on the internet anyway.
This is,
So I have just one more question. I looked at your process. Is this a borrowed process from somewhere else, or did you make this?
I tweaked it from somebody else's product.
Okay, so I think I saw a couple of potential bottlenecks in it. Do you see any bottlenecks in it? It's not a trap. I'm not trained.
Well, I mean, I would say probably the biggest bottleneck is that it's just me.
Is there? So knowing that, are you gonna tweak it anymore? Or do you think you can handle the demand?
I think I can handle
And I also am concerned, and I think that Director Kincaid mentioned it, another possible bottleneck is that educational psychologist staff, right? Just, we have two, is that right?
So technically we have three.
We had, yeah, so our staffing is 2.4 and 0.4 of that is an agency virtual school psychologist, but essentially she's doing the job of almost a full school psychologist because of the need.
All right, and then my last question, last time we ended the meeting on two things, one of them didn't come up at this meeting, and I can't believe that Director Carey didn't mention it, but one of them was, we talked about that there were about 30% of the IEPs that were for one-on-ones that did not come through your office, and we talked about the possibility of auditing those. Have you guys talked about that and thought about?
So currently I'm looking at our roll-up information to look at next year and programming and staffing. And right now I'm sort of focused on the certificate staff. And then once we get all of that figured out, then going back through the classified staff. I don't really want to make these guys do more work. I mean, looking at the people that are in this
No,
room right here.
I guess I don't.
So what I was gonna say,
Okay.
so those independence plans that are gonna be a part of the request process, and then I'm gonna ask people to do on a yearly basis with the IEP. I could technically, like that could be something that we could do is like, hey, let's just everybody do an independence plan for every kid that you have. And there are some people in this room that have like, they would have to do 7 of them, right? So I don't want to put that on the staff right now, but I would like to spend some time once we figure out the certificated staffing and make sure that that's clear, because we might have to make some adjustments based on student numbers. Where is everyone? Do we need to add? Do we need to reduce? Do we need to change our programming for our certificated staff and then go back through our classified staff?
Okay.
So
I don't
as
think
part of the
that-
planning for next
I
year.
don't think I asked my question the right way.
Okay,
Because the answer didn't. That was a good answer, but I don't think I asked the question the right way, so.
Okay.
We talked about, I think what you're saying is that instead of an audit, you would use independence plans over the next year to determine, is that where you're driving at there?
Yeah.
Okay, gotcha, but I did ask the question, you did answer it, I just didn't catch it. All right, I understand that, so we are looking at it through an independence plan over the next.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I guess that's why when you said that, I was like, oh, maybe I understood wrong, because that's why I was asking when it's going to be implemented. Yeah, it's my understanding, we're essentially going to go through every current plan and create this independence plan and moving forward, the existing.
yeah.
I'll just say, as that same mom who goes to those IEP meetings, I appreciate that because, I look at my son's progress or not, and I don't know what he should be doing. I know what he is doing, I know what he's not doing, but I'm not sure what he should be doing because I don't know what's considered normal. Just because the only kid I know is my kid, right? So if we give him something to strive for and he goes, oh, okay, then yeah, I don't know, just a thought. Anyway, I think that's all. Anyway, yes,
Director would do, I heard you say.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, going back to the competitive marketplace piece. This is something that goes across our entire district, across so many different avenues of the contract versus like staff. And I just keep banging my head against the wall of it's like it's competitive marketplace, not so competitive that we can't get contracts. So why are we not? Like, there are some positions that I've seen that the contract is double what we would pay or what we're offering to a non-contract position. Not to say that we offer the standard position at the contract rate, because that doesn't fix the financial issues. However, there's some tipping points in between the offered rate and the contract rate. And I don't know what we can do to fix that, but that seems like a real gaping hole here, which is, it's competitive. However, people are coming for the contract rates, that's fine. And it fills the need, so to speak, but then if all these contracts that are coming in, just, they're sucking the well dry. And so it's just more of my vocalization, and maybe we can meet offline and kind of chat about it a little bit more, but I just would be remiss if I didn't mention that that's always knocking around in my brain.
Yeah.
So.
100%.
So I just want to make sure I ask again, because I thought I heard you just say something different about. So on existing IEPs, are we creating intervention? Once this is in good, we've dialed in, are we going back to already existing IEPs and creating an intervention plan, or is it just ones where we?
You talk about the independence plan?
Yes, the independence plan for specifically for one-on-ones that currently have it in their IEP, is that?
I'm not asking everyone to do all of them for every student, but as the annual IEP comes due, then I'm gonna ask them to do that.
Okay, got
And
it.
I need to train everybody on what that looks like first.
So during reevaluations, the reevaluation for someone who currently has a one-on-one or has some sort of support, then moving forward within the independence plan, and then we're checking on the independence plan. Okay, perfect. That's why I heard two different things. I'm sorry about that.
I had a question. So you're talking about referrals and stuff and how any certificated staff can do a referral, or anybody. Is there documentation or instruction somewhere for someone who wants to do a referral? Like teachers, is it in Safe Schools maybe where it tells them how they can do referrals for that? Or, is there a place on the website for a parent if they want to go and?
There is an optional referral form on the district website.
Okay. Okay.
Any questions? So much harder to see when you're in a straight line.
Actually, Carl, big question.
Yeah.
Slightly off topic, but not really. Since we have everybody in here, can you go reiterate who they can contact for that house bill?
Yeah, it's either the House Education Committee, the Senate Early Learning Committee, specifically with the House Early Learning Committee, we have a representative from the 39th, our legislative district, who sits on that, I always mess it up, Representative Carolyn Teslick. Or members of the Senate or House Appropriations Committee, because those are the ones who are going to look at the money aspect of it. But really, the first reach out should be to members of those education committees to just say, listen, really not get on my soapbox, but this is a civil rights issue. The fact that the state doesn't fully fund for this. But the state's position really kind of is like with McCleary and school construction, all the things are kind of like, oh, we'll sue us. Right, and then we'll see what the courts have to say about it. So, that I think that's why they're taking small bites at the apple. So the thing that's going to motivate them to collectively come to a combined bill prior to the deadline is talking to one of those education committees in the Senate or the House. Those can easily be found on the Washington State website. But if anyone needs a link or any information, they can reach out and I can get that.
Thank you.
Or something too, we should just make readily available I know not everybody's on Facebook and stuff, but it's at least getting to more people for us to pop it on, so the community page.
Yeah.
Just to blast the information out there, right, reach out, here's why.
Yeah, we can, the board is, in our communication is limited. Didn't we just have a conversation about this, March, or I talked to someone?
I think we did have
There's only so much that there's only so much that we can say as a collective body, but people in this room who aren't board members can say whatever they want individually. I can say whatever I want, you can say
Yeah.
whatever you want, but as a board.
Right.
So there are limitations when we can put it on the website, but I know there's a great, Grand Falls community Facebook page that can, that's maybe managed by one board director who is taking no direction from any of us. They can say whatever she wants to say.
There's a special education PTSA group too.
Yes,
Yes.
yes.
Just gonna ask if there's a place where the materials from tonight are publicly available.
I think everything's gonna be posted, right? Molly?
Yeah, the agenda's up there right now, but the packets that were presented aren't in there currently, but they can be added for sure.
Any other questions? You just enter.
Did we? No, it didn't say 5:30. 7:25.
Look at that. Right.
Nice job.
Questions, we will adjourn at 7:25.